because I said what was on my mind. I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot
Welcome, everyone, to Science from the Fringe. My name is Bryce Nickels. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University, and I'm joined once again for another episode of In Defense of Climate Change by Roger Pielke Jr. Roger is a professor emeritus at the University of Colorado Boulder, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, the man behind the curtain of the popular climate science, climate policy Substack, The Honest Broker. And to preview what we're going to talk about today, he is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, listed as enemy number 136 on a list of members of an anti-science cabal threatening the world. Roger, how are you doing today?
I'm a little disappointed I'm only 136, but take what you can get. But I'm doing well. Thank you. Good to see you.
I was disappointed with how low you were on the list too, but we have to first explain what that list is. In order to do that, we have to get into the subject of today's conversation, which is we have decided for this episode of In Defense of Climate Change that we're going to talk about your review of the book, Science Under Siege, abbreviated SUS, which is written by Peter Hotez and Michael Mann. And you published your book review earlier this month in an article titled "The Scientists Who Declared War on Half of America, Michael Mann and Peter Hotez Call Scientists into a Partisan Fight." Now, before we begin, for the purpose of disclosure, I would like to say that I didn't read the book. I'm just going to be honest. I did not read the book, but I assume you did. Is that correct, that you actually read the book before?
I did read the book, the whole thing, cover to cover.
All right. Well, my condolences. But with that in mind, why don't you, the first question I have for you is if you could elaborate on a quote that you have in your review where you say, and I quote, "When future historians look back at the early 21st century and document the causes and consequences of the intense politicization of the U.S. scientific community, Science Under Siege, SUS, will be a core reading." Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, and let me just say, I guess, a little bit of throat clearing. When I was invited to by the National Association of Scholars to review the book, my first thought was, well, no, I don't want to read that book. But then I thought, I should, and I should take it seriously. And they went through the trouble of writing it, so I'm going to go through the trouble of reading it. And so my review it's not about anything else Mann and Hotez have done in their careers or what they've said. It's really entirely about the book. And from page 1 of the book, it is just I don't know what the right word is, a litany of complaints about different people. I'm number 136. But as I was reading the book, I started annotating in the margins and counting them up. And so the bigger context, and I get into this at the end of the review, is that and it's no secret, everyone knows it, that academia and science has become populated by people who lean to the political left, increasingly so over the last 20 years. And not only that, but the institutions that scientists and academics lead have become political actors. And we could talk more about that. And this book, from the very beginning, and I quote extensively from it, it says that the threat to human civilization is Republicans. And so it is a partisan screed from start to finish. We can get into some of the nuances, but when and I have a hard time believing that anyone could read this book and not think, this is just batshit crazy. And when people read it 20, 30, 40 years from now, they're going to look at it and they're going to be like, I can't believe anyone took this kind of commentary seriously.
Well, yeah, that is a question in terms of whether or not people are taking it seriously. So you did mention this idea of the apocalyptic themes that run throughout the book. So I guess I'm going to bring a little levity to today and ask you to assess where you think this book ranks. If we were going to just look at this in terms of assessing the writing relative to other books that have apocalyptic themes, Where would you rank Science Under Siege if we're doing a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the road, 5 is the maze runner, or maze runner, I guess, and then 1 is left behind? Just in terms of quality, where would you put Science Under Siege on that scale of 1 to 10?
Can I use decimal points?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
it'd be like a 0.01.
0.01. So we're putting it under left behind, just for the
Yeah.
record. Okay. And then also another question I have about the writing of the book, like the quality of the writing. And this is, I'm not saying, we're not making accusations or whatever. Do you think that AI contributed at all to the book? Was that your take? I didn't read it. Let
Yeah,
me,
no,
I'm just,
I really don't.
you don't.
I-
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely in the voice of Mann and Hotez, who have been out and around and are not shy. And the book is kind of full of typos too, and it was
Hmm.
not well copy edited, so it could have
That's a
benefited.
revelation. I didn't realize. Wait a second. You're saying that these distinguished scientists, Peter Hotez and Michael Mann, did not properly copy edit their book? This is
Someone
shocking.
should have copy edited it, and
Okay.
one run through ChatGPT would have helped them out.
Right. So AI, they could have benefited from AI, but you think, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm just going to say it. You think that the book sounds too pedestrian for it to have been written by AI. Is that fair, or is that just me? Maybe just me.
Yeah, it's almost like a caricature of themselves. So both Mann and Hotez, to their credit, they have huge followings. They're out on social media, um, but they have a distinctive voice, and it's pretty one dimensional, and it comes across in the book as well. I wanted to take it serious. I was hoping there was going to be, you know, actual analysis and argument, and there wasn't very much.
Maybe I should just take a quick detour back to the sort of beginning here to just, can you introduce, like, who are Michael Mann and Peter Hotez? I guess I jumped in making the assumption that everyone listening to this would know, but can you give a quick 30-second bio of each of these guys, or
Yeah, and
combined?
maybe I'll lean on you for Hotez because I only, encountered Peter Hotez, professionally out in the world after COVID hit. Michael Mann is someone who I've known for, going on 25 years, and he's uh, he's probably the most prominent, loudest voice in climate science for a long time. He took some heat from Republicans in the early 2000s, from members of Congress, Joe Barton, the Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli. They were searching for his emails and so on. But and I, at the time, I defended man. Didn't think politicians should be going after scientists. But he gives as good as he takes, and has been involved in a lawsuit for almost 15 years. Two people said some mean things about him. He's famous for publishing the so-called hockey stick in the late 1990s, um, and he's more a public intellectual at this point than a practicing scientist. But to his credit, he gets a lot of attention. Peter Hotez, I don't know where I first encountered him. It was probably on CNN or something, with his characteristic bow tie. And I don't know much about his scientific background, um, but he's very prominent. Again, an outspoken voice. He's got 430,000 Twitter followers. Um, I know him for very vigorously advocating for lockdowns and distancing and so on during the pandemic. And also, since then, he's become a very outspoken opponent to the idea of a research related incident as the origin of COVID. But maybe you know his deeper history far better than me.
Well, even if I did, I don't think we should get into it. I think the key thing is that he's a staunch defender of vaccines. I think he may have been the one who came up with this term anti-science that I guess I'd like you to touch on in a second. But so we have Michael Mann, who's known for this hockey stick curve controversy, and Peter Hotez, a staunch defender of vaccines, writing a book to try to, raise alarm about the anti-science movement threatening humanity. I guess, as an aside, do you have a recommendation? Well, can you think of any nicknames we could give these two distinguished authors and scientists?
They gave themselves nicknames in the book. The last
Oh, they
chapter
did.
ends with analogizing themselves to the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's right.
And they're the lowly hobbits, the cute, cuddly hobbits who are fighting this existential battle. My original title for the book review was something like when hobbits attack, or something like that. And fortunately, the editors at the National Association of Scholars thought that would be a little too inside baseball. So
Yeah, well, I do appreciate that title. I did notice that you mentioned that in your review. I had again, I'm relying on ChatGPT for these, but it came up with some good ones. Two that I think make sense, and the third one that I'm going to say we should go with perhaps in the future when referring to these two gentlemen. So the first potential nickname for this dynamic duo would be the anti-science warriors. The second would be defenders of orthodoxy. And the third, and what my favorite is just stick and jab. Stick and jab. I think that works. But anyway, let's get back to your book review. And so we want to talk about the terminology that these fine authors, use throughout the book. And so, one thing that came up that I'm earlier in our conversation was this concept of an anti-science cabal threatening the world. And you are disappointingly number 136 on this list out of 137, so near the bottom. Like,
right,
I mean, you
almost an
barely
afterthought. Yeah,
almost an afterthought. And I will mention that two people that have been involved in discussions of the potential lab origin of COVID, I think are on this list, Alina Chan and Matt Ridley. They
right.
made the list. I didn't read the book, but I'm assuming I'm not on the list. I mean, that's fair, right?
Yeah,
Right?
I don't think you're in there, Bryce.
I would maybe I can make a plea to try to get like number 138 in a new edition of the book. Like, just putting it out there. Like, I'm a little offended. My ego's a little hurt that I'm not part of the anti-science cabal. It sounds fun, Roger. I don't know where you have meetings. If you do you fly to Davos to have discussions or something? But with regard to maybe to try to be serious here, which is difficult for me, can you first define what they mean by anti-science and then explain what, if it exists, and if it does, you're a part of it, what is an anti-science cabal?
Yeah, so there is a serious backdrop here. The notion of anti-science is not new, and in the field of science technology studies, it goes back a long time. And that there is this, to simplify things, there's this operating theory in science technology studies called the deficit model of science. And the idea is that people operate with a deficit of knowledge. They just don't have the same facts that the experts have. And the idea, and this goes back to the early days when science communication began to be a thing. The idea was, well, if we experts just educate the public and policymakers so they know what we know, then they'll come to share our values and policy preferences if we close that deficit. And if they refuse to learn, then they must be opposed to the Enlightenment, to science, to knowledge, and they are anti-science. And Mann and Hotez don't get into any of this history. They basically define anti-science as people who hold views that may be different than theirs, where they associate their views with quote unquote science. And so I do comment in the review, it is confusing because they start out with this focus on the Republicans, and as you go through the book, many of the people on their enemies list are not Republicans. They're not on the right. They're just people that they've happened to cross paths with and disagree over time. So the anti-science cabal is in to be fair to them, it's people they have encountered that they disagree with. It is interesting because Hotez in particular carves out some space for the Texas oilmen who funded, for example, the Texas Medical Center in Houston, and for Saudi Arabia, which has treated him well and had him visit on many occasions. And they call Saudi Arabia a paradox because they're a petro state. They pump a lot of oil, but at the same time, they were nice to Hotez, so they get a little asterisk next to them. So it is difficult to coherently interpret their argument because it's less of an argument and it is more of a listing of an enemies list than a, if you said, here's the criteria of the anti-science cabal, go out in the world and apply them and see who fits in there, it would not be possible with this book.
Which again makes it a little bit disappointing that I'm not considered an enemy, because I thought, I don't know, I just don't rise. I'm just not rising to the occasion. I mean, I don't want to make this about me, Roger, at all. That might be a
There
lot.
are some pages in there about the debate over the origins of COVID.
Right. Well,
But
I
I
get
think
it.
there's
No,
a lot
I
of-
don't want to. I don't want to. I'm just saying. Again, it's just my own ego getting a little hurt here, but that's okay, because this is.
There's a
we
lot of
can move
fertile
on.
ground they left unplowed there. So
That's right. But I'm jealous. I'm just going to be straight with you, right? I'm jealous. You're on the list. I'm not. So kudos to you. Congratulations. And we move on to further terminology. So there's the anti-science cabal, but then there's also an anti-science ecosystem. So what would the anti-science ecosystem be? If we're defining the cabal as the enemies list, then what's the ecosystem?
So they have this alliterative 5-part framework, the press, petrostates. And so they have these categories. And in the book, the chapters are organized around these different words that start with the letter P. They have a figure in the book, which I reproduce, which is, like a bad PowerPoint image. But the ecosystem is apparently the institutions and professions within which their enemies inhabit. And if that sounds a bit circular, then I think that's probably right. So it's not, it starts out, it's coherent. The enemy are Republicans in the United States. They are threatening the future of humanity. But then it expands out, and in the end, it's interesting because they criticize Democratic politicians, they criticize the New York Times, the mainstream media, and in the end, they say, it's really up to us scientists, and we're willing to take on this fight. So it's on the narrow end, the anti-science cabal is the ecosystem are just Republicans, and at the broad end, it's everyone except them.
By the way, kudos to you for trying to explain this coherently. I thank you. I appreciate it. Let me ask now again, just taking some of the quotes that you pull out in your review, and I want you to assess how credible such a statement is. So the first statement from the book that I'm going to ask you to assess the credibility of requires that you define just quickly what Climategate was. So here's the quote: "Climategate may well have indeed constituted a test run for Russia's influence campaign in 2016 to elect Donald Trump." How credible do you think that statement is?
So in 2009, someone found, hacked, released a whole slew of emails from the University of East Anglia in the UK involving climate scientists talking amongst themselves. And Michael Mann was one of the people whose emails were featured there. It was a scandal at the time, not because of research misconduct or falsifying information, but because of the highly political nature of the discussions, the questionable ethical practices. I'm in the Climategate emails, and there's a couple scientists involved with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change talking about how they wanted to exclude my research from the next report, which they did. Mann does not come off particularly well there. So in the book, they have this I don't know what it is, theory that Climategate was Russia's effort to practice hacking emails so that in 2016 they could get Donald Trump elected. And that's, I don't know. Again, I'll try to be kind. That's far-fetched to suggest that there's no evidence that the Russians hacked the Climategate emails. And if they did, there's no evidence that they thought there was some path from the University of East Anglia email server to Donald Trump in the White House. So it is, often the writing in this book frames these battles that their Mann and Hotez are involved in very grandiose, stark terms that, it's Climategate wasn't just somebody stealing emails. It was about capturing the presidency of the United States and, places them at the center of that controversy. I don't find that particularly plausible. Although, if they have evidence for it, I'd love to see it.
Well, here on Science from the Fringe, this sounds like what would qualify as a fringe theory, and I would welcome an elaboration of this idea. It sounds pretty provocative, and I would welcome a full investigation to see if this is true or not. Now, moving on, I want to do a sort of a quick agree or disagree, and maybe you could elaborate potentially on why. More quotes from the book. Do you believe, this is the first question, do you believe we must treat the rising tide of scientific disinformation with the same urgency as the rise of Nazi Germany? Agree or disagree, and why?
Disagree. I mean, it was only like 3 pages before that they were criticizing, I think it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, for invoking a Nazi analogy. How can you possibly do that? Beyond the pale. And again, this is the over the top rhetoric that Republicans in the United States aren't just Republicans; they're Nazis.
Okay, thank you for that. Second, the leadership of the Democratic Party has not prioritized standing up to the anti-science machine of the GOP and their malevolent plutocrat allies.
So I think they do single out, like Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who is very much aligned with their thinking. But there has been far too much focus on battling over science by Democrats and Republicans. And so basically what they're saying there is that our views haven't been ascendant in the Democratic Party to the degree we would like.
Third, journalists are poorly equipped to litigate the contentious, often technical debates about the science. Do you agree or disagree?
There's a lot of good journalists out there, and there are some that are very partisan and repeat. I mean, interestingly, in the book, on several occasions, they do kind of a TikTok play-by-play of what they saw on MSNBC one night, or what they encountered on Twitter. And again, it gets back to the good information is the information we agree with, and the bad information is that which we don't, which is not a particularly good standard for evaluating claims.
Fourth, the public does not have a deep understanding of what it is we actually do as, quote, working scientists, unquote.
Well, that's yeah, of course, and we're all members of the public too, and so are Mann and Hotez, and so um, we're all mostly ignorant about most things. I mean, that's a good starting point for trying to think through how science and politics collide. They use it again as part of this deficit model that the public is, my interpretation, the public is just too dumb to understand these things we're claiming, and they get seduced by, in this case, Republican politicians who give them false information that people readily believe.
I see. So they're framing that as like public is dumb, and you're saying that is, as a reasonable statement, it's just reflecting reality and also reflective of scientists themselves as ignorant of fields that are not like immediately relevant to them and their studies, right?
We're all
So,
dumb.
yeah,
We're all dumb.
we're all dumb. That's
yeah.
right. Yes, but some of us are a member of a cabal and others are not. So
That's right.
let's just be fair. Okay. Now, you did mention solutions because this book isn't just about complaints about and an enemies list. So can you take our faithful listeners through the solutions that Mann and Hotez propose in this book for how to combat anti-science?
Yeah, I mean, there's really only a couple specific recommendations they make. One is getting rid of the filibuster in the U.S. Senate, and the other is to stack the Supreme Court. And they suggest doing both of those only when we get to the point where Democrats are in charge of the presidency in both houses of Congress. We could debate whether those are good ideas or not, but it's hard to connect that to the anti-science cabal. I'm not sure what either one of those would do to address the problem as they see it, that there are people in the United States. It's a very U.S. focused book. People in the United States who happen to vote for Republicans. That seems to be the core issue. They have more general recommendations. We have to educate the public. The media needs to promote our messages being their messages, and they need to be more prominent. So it's a very light touch on actual real world interventions that would address the problem that they think they've identified.
Don't want to dwell on this, but do you think that AI would do a better job of coming up with solutions to the problems? Like if we just did a prompt, like here are the problems, or sorry, here are the problems, offer some solutions, and we put that into an AI. Do you think
Yeah, it
that
would be interesting to hear what AI thinks the problem is that they've identified,
Oh,
because
you're saying we can't even agree on the sort of like, what is the problem that they're offering a solution to? Is
right.
that
I
what
mean,
okay.
I mean, I read the book, and the problem as I see it is that there exist Republicans, and
Okay.
that's. I mean, and Mann has tweeted. I don't go beyond the book when in the review, but Mann has tweeted that and this is a near quote. For the U.S. to 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 sustain the GOP must be destroyed. And on many occasions, and it has frequently compared Republicans to Nazis. And so, if the problem is we have people on the right side of the political spectrum, I don't know that there is a solution to that. It just doesn't work. I mean, it's good. It's good to be an ideologue, to attract attention on Twitter. It's very black and white, but that sort of a perspective fails when you encounter the real world and realize that people are complex, and it's perfectly legitimate to be on the left of the political spectrum and perfectly legitimate to be on the right, and we all got to live together.
This leads into one of the last thoughts that you put into your review, which is you say, one of the important pieces of the story is that the scientific community has warmly embraced and promoted the book's divisive message. I don't want to get, I mean, this is actually quite serious. So, the idea that scientists are in an existential war against their fellow citizens, a war that can only be won by vanquishing the enemy. Can you speak a little bit more of that, to that point?
Yeah, I mean, this is where this gets back to my idea that not many people have actually read this book, um, as compared to the number of people who endorse its messages, because it is so over the top partisan. But and I quote this in the review, both Nature and Science, two of the leading journals, um, publish glowing reviews of the book by people who are closely allied to Mann and Hotez, just coincidentally. Um, when Michael Mann, initially won his lawsuit, in a DC district court, a defamation lawsuit, the editor in chief of Science, wrote a glowing defense of Mann's abhorrent behavior, and it said, the title was "Passion is not misconduct." So this guy's passion, we should celebrate, and it's not misconduct. And so the embrace of this divisive, highly partisan messages, coupled with some really questionable behavior. I mean, I can tell you, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be at the Conference on World Affairs at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I spent 25 years on the faculty. And initially, it was announced I was going to be on a panel with me and Michael Mann talking about climate science and policy. And then a couple days after that was put on the web, it disappeared. And I contacted and asked them, and they said, Michael Mann complained he doesn't want you to be at this Conference on World Affairs, and so he refused not only to appear with me, but was making an effort to get me deplatformed. He wasn't successful, but now we have our own panels. Mine's in the morning, his is in the afternoon. This sort of behavior, where scientists are trying to cancel their colleagues because they don't like their message, has no place in science. We should all be embracing appearing with the people who disagree with us most, and show, in academia, we can disagree about science, about policy, and then shake hands and move on. So the embrace of this highly partisan, toxic message by large swaths of the scientific community it as I think it's symptomatic of this time we're in. I don't I don't think that people even recognize it as being, intensely partisan. It's become so normalized in parts of the scientific community that it's us against them. Us are the scientists, them are the Republicans, or whoever. Um, and there's no concept that science exists for everyone. Science is for Donald Trump, just like it's for Kamala Harris. And it's our job as experts to figure that out, not to take sides and try to vanquish the people we don't like.
So that's a very nice message, even from a member of a cabal that I'm jealous of your presence in. Seriously, if you can reach out to the other members of the cabal, maybe I can just get into it without needing to be mentioned in the
We've
book.
got
If
a
there's
meeting in the
room for something,
Batcave coming up.
okay,
I'll
let me
propose you for
know.
nomination.
Thank you. Whatever the if you need a CV or something, let me know. Okay, so final thoughts on the book.
Yeah, I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I had the opportunity to review it. I would hope people would at least read my review. There has been zero pushback from Mann or Hotez. Mann sent some mean tweets out there, but didn't really take any issue. I'm happy. I'm happy to host either of them to reply to my post and say, "Here's what you got wrong about our book," or what. Um, and I have heard from people in the mainline scientific community who I won't name who are, I guess, aware now that maybe the community overstepped in becoming a partisan player. I don't know how far that message has sunk in, but if science is going to survive this Trump era and emerge stronger, and it's going to have to become more ecumenical in its embrace of the diversity of not just American politics but global politics, and try to make friends across the aisle, even if the scientific community is slanted in one particular direction.
When you say survive in the Trump era, you meaning the polarization or the politicization of science,
No,
or are
I
you?
mean, to be very explicit, I think that the Trump administration, with some notable exceptions, but in areas like public health, like climate, um, the Trump administration has taken a sledgehammer to institutions. Um, I was just reading about how um, one scientist had their NIH grant canceled because it included the phrases involving diversity, and they were talking about biological diversity, not DEI. The idea that you can use a laundry list of key terms in National Science Foundation, like climate change, and then just get rid of those grants. That's not how things should be done. The decimation of expert advisory bodies, from vaccine advisory bodies to um, intelligence advisory bodies, is problematic. So I think that the Trump administration has undercut a lot of the institutional strengths of science. In their effort, it's a baby going out with the bathwater sort of thing. Can science institutions be improved? Sure, they can, but you're not going to improve them by sledgehammer. Probably need scalpels instead.
Maybe on a future episode of In Defense of Climate Change, we could have a larger discussion of that, because I think I disagree with I think I maybe favor more babies going out with the bathwater than you, perhaps.
Yeah,
And
good.
so
We should talk about that because
in that, because
yeah,
we can, yeah. I just wanted, when you mentioned the Trump administration, the listeners, Roger, they get triggered by stuff. I know my listeners, and I know that they will hear certain things and be like, what? Anyway, so maybe for another time. But to come back to the book, so you said, you were glad you read it, and you got, you know, generally positive feedback from your review. And I guess, I don't know, you are actually recommending this as something that will stand the test of time. People will look back at, and it will say, wow, I can't believe that that came out. And that sort of like marks this historical place.
I don't know what the right analogy is, but if people are familiar with the black and white film Birth of a Nation from 1920s, you look back on it and say, wow, that really was a different time. There were some different sensibilities that didn't stand the test of time. So I think that the book, its arguments, such as they are arguments, they don't even stand the test of the moment. But as a window into the thinking of some leading scientists, and more importantly, a window into how the broader scientific community came to embrace that view, I do think it'll be an important text going forward. And the general reaction, I think, to scientists 30, 40, 50 years from now, my hope and expectation is they'll say, boy, we believed some crazy stuff back then.
Last thing I'll say is if either Michael Mann or Peter Hotez wants to come on Science from the Fringe and elaborate on their theory that Climategate was a dry run for the 2016 election interference by Russia, I would love to have you on to discuss that. And also, if you like the nickname Stick and Jab and you want to use it, that's yours. I'm not going to make any copyright claims on that. Please feel free to use that as you wish. So with that, Roger, I'm going to thank you very much for joining me once again on our second episode of In Defense of Climate Change. I'm going to promise the listeners that next episode, we're going to kind of get back to climate science. This is a bit of a little bit out of the norm on what we're trying to do here. So thanks again, Roger, for joining me. Until next time, my name is Bryce Nickels on Science from the Fringes, In Defense of Climate Change. Take care, everybody.